So we want to talk about National Healthcare Decisions Day, and I always love this because what we're able to do, Dr. Nesbitt and I together, although I always defer to him, but what we do is talk about this from both a legal, as an attorney, my perspective, and as a medical perspective. And often people see that they're in odds with each other, and they're really not. It's that this is a complicated issue that people often avoid until the last minute. And for sure, you being on here today is helpful to you and to your family, because the more that you can learn, the more that you can plan ahead, the more that you can communicate about what your wishes are, the better, the absolute better. And so I think that if there's any important message today, I think that that really ties it up in a nutshell. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nesbitt to talk about healthcare decisions. And we're going to talk about them from a general idea of, what is hospice, what is palliative care, what are key conversations that we have, what are healthcare decisions, so certainly that baseline of information. But this year we also wanted to talk a little bit specifically about Alzheimer's and dementia care. And also, a topic that's on a lot of our minds right now, the use of ventilators. And so I'll hand it over to Dr. Nesbitt, and I'm sure to interrupt him.
Oh, that's good. Thank you, Julie. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to folks about how essential it is to do this. Just so you know my background, I was a primary care physician for over 20 years. And then for the last 16 years have been fully devoted to hospice and palliative care. And that means in the hospice world, we're focusing on those who have some terminal illness. And in the palliative care world, we're just trying to help people who have some serious illness, may or may not be terminal, but they're just having symptoms or need for additional assistance. So I spend all my time now thinking about how do we do this right? How do we do the right thing for the person who depends on us to do this right? And what I can tell you that is that for physicians and nurses and all of us in medicine, as we're working to do the right thing for the person, we do not know that without some way for that person to have conveyed what they prefer, what they want, what they do want, what they would never want. And I want to talk about three things. One is this issue. How do we do the advanced care planning, thinking about this in the right way? Second, I want to touch base on the systems that we set up to try and help make sure it goes the right way. So palliative care, hospice, that sort of thing. And I do want to spend a few minutes talking about this COVID pandemic that we're facing and how that changes this already complex world in ways that are really difficult. So let me start by telling you a story about a patient who is a real patient. I won't use his name, who we'll call Jack, who's an 85-year-old guy, lives at home, has some COPD, heart disease, very mild dementia, not that bad. His son lived with him for years, but now moved out of town. So Jack is living alone. His son worries about him every day, calls to check on him. One morning when he calls, Dad doesn't pick up. He calls again, Dad doesn't pick up. He calls the neighbor, says, go check on Dad. So the neighbor comes in and finds Jack face down on the floor, halfway between the bed and the bathroom. And he's breathing in an abnormal way. The friend calls 911. They bring Jack into the hospital. And the testing in the emergency room shows that he's had a middle cerebral artery stroke. So he's had a big stroke now. And he is in and out of consciousness. His swallowing is impaired. He's having problems managing his secretions. And as we go forward, taking care of Jack today and tonight and tomorrow, we have really important decisions to be made about what should we do for Jack if all of a sudden his breathing is so bad that the only way to keep him going is put him on a ventilator, or if his heart stops, to do CPR, or if in a few days his swallowing does not get better, should we put in an artificial feeding tube? Who would know this? Who knows what Jack wants? Well, Jack does, But very often, more than half the time, when we're needing to know what should we do about this, the person themselves is too sick, too lethargic, too medicated, unable to tell us. And so as we struggle to know what should we do for Jack, Jack can't tell us. And so who can tell us? So in thinking about this, we think about who would act as the surrogate, the decision maker to stand in for Jack. And what I can tell you is it is really important for people to have ahead of time, for Jack to have thought about that ahead of time and named his healthcare agent in the state of Pennsylvania, the surrogate who is identified by the patient and written down, I want this person to decide for me. That person has the authority to speak for Jack. Unfortunately, many Pennsylvanians, many Americans have never named somebody, never thought about it. I don't know. And when we're then in the hospital looking at who should we turn to, and we don't know who Jack would want us to turn to, then we turn to a default list. And this goes down this list that was created by our legislature, trying in good faith to come up with a list of who would be the one that we should turn to, starting with spouse, or child, not child of spouse. So if this is a second marriage, the child who is not the child of the current spouse has equal decision-making authority with spouse. And that outranks other children, and that outranks siblings. It just is a artificial list. And it may be right, but it may be a mess. And so as we struggle to know who do we turn to, we may get that wrong. So I will tell you that the most important thing is that there has been a discussion and some thought by all of us about who would we want to speak for us. When we name our agent, we're not naming the person we love the most necessarily, or the one who lives closest to us necessarily. We're thinking about who could do this really hard thing. And that is in the middle of a difficult medical circumstance, where medical information is almost never completely straightforward. Doctors almost never come in and say, I guarantee this is what's going to happen to your dad, because most of the time we don't know it like that. Most of the time we know these are the odds, this is the probability, this is what we think. And in the midst of that circumstance, who could say, hearing all that information, I think my loved one would want this, even if it's an emotional time. Even if somebody else is going to come and criticize, I can't believe you did that for, who could do this? So thinking about and naming your healthcare agent and writing it down, this is a part of the process that Julie, I'm sure, will go through in terms of the form, super important. And not just naming that person, but thinking about and talking with that person and other loved ones, what kind of living is okay for you? Sometimes we tend to think about this in terms of procedural things. Well, I would want a ventilator, but I would never want blood transfusions, but I would want dialysis. But in real life, in the hospital, it actually turns out that it depends very often. If I ask someone, do you ever want to be on a ventilator? And they say, no, I don't think I want that. And then I say, wait, what if you had a severe pneumonia and with 3 days on a vent, you have a 95% chance of survival? They might say, well, yeah. But if you're terminally ill and there's no way you're ever going to get off the vent, the answer is no. So it's not the technology as much as what sort of living would it be like? What's the odds? Where do we stand? For us, for you and I to think that through and talk these things over with our loved ones, especially the one we're going to name as our agent, that empowers them when the time comes, when the physician is saying, what do you think? And I see this regularly when somebody says, yeah, Mom talked with me about this. She would never want it like that. I know she wouldn't. And this is really making me sad. And if it were me, I think I'd do every single thing, but I know she wouldn't want that. It empowers the person to speak with the voice that's authentic to what the individual wants. And it decreases the trauma for that person who is making these hard decisions. Anybody who's watching who has been in the circumstance of trying to make these really tough decisions for someone that you know that this really is hard. It's really emotional. People struggle with it. Studies have shown that these people afterwards will really have psychological sequelae. I'm anxious, I worry about that. I wake up at night, I think about mom's face. Did I do the right thing? But if mom has talked to them and they've talked about this before, and they make even difficult choices knowing that this is what mom would think, then the difficulty for them afterwards is lessened. So this kind of discussion and naming your agent is really important for you to make sure things go right for you, and really important for your loved ones, and especially your agent, both at the time and afterwards. So that's the process of advanced care planning. I will tell you that I do have a bent. Julie's right about this, that we've had this idea in the past that if we could just get the right document and check off the right checks, then we would know what to be done. And so that's the living will paradigm. I do want ventilator, but I don't want dialysis. And the problem we see with that is the living will, in most living will paradigms, it says if I am terminally ill or permanently unconscious, I do or do not want. And most of the time when we're struggling with this, it's situations like Jack. Jack's had a terrible stroke, but he's not really terminally ill. He could survive this, and he's not permanently unconscious, never to wake up. He's just really neurologically injured. What would he want? So even if Jack had done a checkoff form 20 years ago in a lawyer's office, that wouldn't necessarily answer the question we need to know now. When I say that, I do not mean to say documents are irrelevant. They are not. They're very important, especially having documented who do you want to be your surrogate decision maker. And there are some people who say, I don't care in what circumstance, I never want a feeding tube, or I always want that. Having that written down is very appropriate because it can kind of help people know in the future, boy, Dad really felt strongly about it. So the process of advanced care planning, that's thinking about these things, talking about it with your loved ones, especially your surrogate, and documenting who's your surrogate and especially important things that you really hold to. That's really important. And when that's been done, as I'm caring for people in the ICU or in the hospital, when it's really hard, it's better. It's better for us so we know we're doing the right thing, and it's better for the patient and family. So that's what I wanted to say about advanced care planning. Now, once we have a sense of what is to be done, how do we have a system to help the person and their loved ones to try and make sure as they're going through their serious illness or eventually their terminal illness as they come closer to their dying day, how do we try and make sure things go right for them? And there's different systems that we have in place. And so for most people who are pretty healthy, doing okay, getting acute illness, our usual health system takes care of it just great. But if there are people who have serious or advanced illness, people who are pretty sick, not necessarily dying within a few months or something, but boy, this person's sick enough, they're at high risk of being in the hospital in the next year or two. They actually, the doctor would not be shocked if they were to die in the next few years. For those people, palliative care helps a lot. So palliative care is a team of people who come alongside individuals who have serious or advanced illness and help with symptoms. This person's shortness of breath is terrible. This pain can't be controlled. Help support the family as they're figuring out, how do we line things up right for Dad? I'd like to have him at home, but I don't know how to get things set up in here so we can have what we need. And help with decisions. Gee, Dad's kidneys are getting pretty bad. They're talking about dialysis. My sister thinks he absolutely needs to do it, and my brother says absolutely not, and I don't even know how to talk about this. So these are the ways: symptom management, support for patient and family, and helping with decisions that supportive and palliative care, our team can help. That team is involved with people who are in the community, living at home, living in nursing homes, assisted living, in the hospital. It helps people who are some years away from dying, just sick, and some people who are coming up on their dying. If we have somebody who is within 6 months of expected death, and their high goal is to be home, wherever their home is, and to be comfortable there, cared for best they can until their dying day, that's what hospice is set up for. And so hospice is a larger team than the palliative care team. And it has nurses and nurses' aides and chaplain and social worker and bereavement support and volunteers who can come alongside the individual and their family and help with medicines, providing them and paying for them, help with the equipment you need to take care of my loved one at home, bring it out, pay for it, and have somebody who's always available. Now, not hospice doesn't live with you, but hospice is always available and will be there as often as is needed to try and help. So hospice really has been shown to make such a difference if somebody is in that difficult time of life. The last thing I want to touch about is what we are living through, and that is this COVID pandemic, which is unlike anything any of us have lived through in our lifetime. And I will tell you that in the difficulty of helping people who are sick and supporting patients and families, the world we're in right now has made it much, much worse. So the people who are in the hospital, any of you who have had loved ones in the hospital, you know that nobody has visitors, no. And so even Dad, who's in the hospital and he's had a big MI and he's really scared and he can't have his family members with him unless he is actively dying. And so our hospital, like many hospitals around the country, as we're trying to balance safety and decreasing the risk of infection versus helping the families in the best way that we can, we'll allow one individual to come in and be with somebody who we think is coming to their dying moment, unless they have COVID. And so our hospital, like every hospital, if someone has COVID, they are not allowed to have visitors, even if they're so sick that they are dying, even as they die. And I will tell you that this is super hard for all of us in the medical world, as we have people who are sick and scared and suffering, and their loved ones cannot be with them. And we medical folks are trying to help in the right way. The nurses are really great in terms of trying to help. We all are. So trying to connect Facebook connections and phone connections if we can't do that, and passing on messages to the loved ones. But it's really made it hard. It also has changed a lot of what we have taken for granted in our country for many years. And there's enough stuff that everybody can get what they need. That is actually not true now. And we face the dilemma, the challenge of what if we do not have enough of that resource that everybody who could benefit from that can get it? What if we have to ration, allocate, triage who gets what? And many of you will have seen discussion of this in the news. This absolutely was happening in northern Italy. Places where there's been epicenters in our country, like New York, they have been banging up against this frightening scenario of, for example, in our town, if we have 28 ventilators and we have 35 people who need a vent today, who gets that ventilator? How do we decide that? How can we do this balancing what is the ethical thing to do with what we have available? And what I can tell you is I'm chairman of the ethics committee for over 20 years, and we've had a very active process over the last several months, developing a system by which we would look at this and use physiologic variables, objective, best we can, that link with the chance of survival. And so as we're looking at different people who need this limited resource, we are focusing our decision-making on who is most likely to survive. From an ethical standpoint, this is a fundamental change. We've always been focused on autonomy and the person's ability to choose and get what they want. In a circumstance where we absolutely do not have enough, our ethical framework changes to how can we have the highest number of us survive? And this can mean really hard choices about someone getting that limited resource and somebody not. So as we have created that framework, it's focused on physiology and documented things that link with likelihood of survival to hospital discharge and beyond. And things like age or race or gender or socioeconomic stat, none of that is a part of the calculus. All of this is blinded to the people who are working to allocate the resources in the right way. At this moment, it is looking like our area has had low prevalence of COVID, thank God. And that is at this moment, and every day is a new day, and so we watch with bated breath. But I am hopeful that in our region, we will not come to that point and have enough to give what is needed for everyone. We've been able to do that. But it really steps you back to realize, wow, in this circumstance, we're facing decisions that many humans, probably most around the world, deal with regularly. There's not enough stuff. Some people get it, some people don't. The last thing I'm going to mention, this is all very sobering, but I thought I would just share it with you. And that is one other area of decision making is changed in the COVID world. And that is if somebody is so sick that they come to their heart stopping, they come to their dying moment, do we do CPR in that moment? And our norm has been people decide about that. Yeah, I want you to do CPR. And even people who have super low probability of ever surviving it, if the person said, yeah, I think I want that, well, then we would do CPR. Even with the nurses and doctors knowing, we're doing this painful procedure on this person who's probably not going to benefit, but they really wanted it. What I can tell you in the COVID era for this highly contagious disease, having a procedure like CPR, which showers the virus on everyone who is in the room. There are times when the thought of if this person is coming to death and it looks like there's just no chance they're going to make it, that in those circumstances, we may say we are not going to be able to do CPR on that person, will not do what will not help, because the risk of others is far exceeding any benefit for the person. And this is very controversial. It's hard to even think about such a thing. And we have not faced that in our town, not yet. But this is being faced in epicenters around the country. So we, in our area, our hospital system, we do not have a policy that says we never would do CPR on anybody who's infected with the virus. We have not adopted that. Some organizations have, but we have not. We had a person who, they had an acute event and they had a chance of surviving this. We would make sure that all staff members take the time to put on their protective equipment as they step in. And that makes this harder. If you run into somebody who is in cardiopulmonary arrest, seconds matter. And yet for the staff to crash in and start doing things that shower them with the virus, that can't be. And so we say, put on your equipment, you must, and take that 1 minute or minute and a half to do it and then respond. So I hope and pray that this does not get us to that level, but these are some of the decisions that are being faced around our country and some of the challenges that are being faced by the medical professionals in those places where it's hit so hard. So I'm sorry to end on hard stuff, but that's what I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nesbitt. Thank you for your honest and your willingness to broach a very difficult subject. You know, one of the things that I'm thankful for, and you may disagree, obviously I'm a lay person interacting with this, but I think from our state, Dr. Levine, and what's on the Department of Health website, I think is really helpful and transparent. So on the Department of Health website, you can see how many people are in the hospital at any point in time, and you can see how many people are needing ventilators and how many ventilators are available. And I appreciate that transparency. Not that I could do anything about it, but it lets me balance what else I see being spread out there. And so I really appreciate that. I also appreciate your just sharing with us. I think, I don't want to talk for people on here, but I know when you and I talked about this earlier, it really was calming and settling for me to know that people like yourself and other professionals in our area had really looked at this. And even if they are tough decisions, it appears to me that they're not being made in a crisis, that this has been thought through, and that we don't want to get to certain places, but we're not in a crisis about it. We have thought through and thought, what can we do and how can we balance this? And I think that that's all any of us can ask for, is that there is some system, some honest experts getting together and trying to figure out, given the situation that we have, what's the best we can do for the most amount of people. Yeah, so I really appreciate that very much as we move forward. The only other thing I wanted to comment on myself, and push Dr. Nesbitt to comment on a little bit is about this whole end of life with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia.
Yeah.
And the reason I think this is important from my perspective is it is hard for myself as an attorney to get people to care about these issues. You know, we always think we have more time, but when we have a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, we kind of know a path that we're on and a journey that we're on. And I think it gives us an opportunity to do what you say, Dr. Nesbitt, which is let's find out from the person themselves, given right now, given not some list out there, but given right now and the quality of life that I would have right now, what would I want? And I bring this up because I know that palliative care and the support system at UPMC Williamsport or Divine, it was helpful to my own family in providing supportive services. So I didn't know if you could comment a little bit about that, because to be honest with you, I've been an elder care attorney for 20 years, and it wouldn't have been the first place I would have looked at for information. And I wanted to kind of put that out there to people and maybe have you comment on your perspective of that.
Yeah, thanks. It is really important. And unfortunately, that diagnosis is prevalent and is expected to become more and more prevalent in the decades to come. So most of us will be dealing with this, if not for ourselves, then for people that we care about. And it is a disease that has a progressive, inexorable course that leads to more and more being taken from you in terms of functional capacity, intellectual capacity, progressively things that are predictably going to go, like somebody's inability to swallow, which happens when you have fast 7 dementia. And so for someone to early, once the diagnosis is established, and the family and the loved one, the person who is dealing with this, to think about when would I be at a point where I wouldn't want to do tubes or other things to preserve me like that. I'm ready to come to my dying day. And different people feel differently, but I will tell you that some decisions, for example, do we stick a feeding tube in dad who has dementia? If that is not considered, not discussed until dad has had his first aspiration event, is in the hospital, you've lost an opportunity to process all of what goes into that. And there's a whole lot of information about how do people suffer as they go forward with end stage dementia or end stage something that makes you unable to swallow very much. Do you intrinsically suffer unless you have a tube surgically put into your stomach? So in the world of palliative care, we often will come alongside and talk with families and just share what we know about this. And different families will come to different decisions. There's some folks that say, yes, I want my dad on a ventilator no matter what, or yes, I want that tube put in. It turns out as people get information, it does change the default. Many people on the front end go, oh, well, I think I want this. And once they think about it, hear information, have a chance to process and talk within the family, then a higher number of people say, what most matters is what my loved one feels and experiences. And it often will make people choose away from technologic to institutional-based stuff. That's not the goal of the conversation. The conversation is not directive. We're not trying to get people to go one way or the other, but just trying to make sure people know. So honestly, in many of the diseases that we deal with, for dementia, we know that functional decline and swallowing problems are going to happen. For emphysema or end-stage lung disease, we know that respiratory failure and the ultimate decision about do you want to be on a ventilator over time, that's going to come. For somebody who's got bad renal failure, progressively getting worse, we know that the decision is likely to come up. Do you want to be on dialysis if it comes to that point? And so thinking about these things, not in the crisis moment in the emergency room, but ahead of time, and having information from healthcare professionals, and in palliative care, this is what we do, try and help. And I don't mean just palliative care folks. Renal doctors can talk about dialysis, pulmonary people talk about vent. So this is something to talk to medical professionals about, but this is very much within the bailiwick of the palliative care team. Yeah.
So, if I'm on here listening and I'm thinking that I have a loved one or myself that might need help with palliative care, what is my first step? Is it to call palliative care, or is it to contact my primary care physician? What's the best way to approach that?
Right. So our supportive and palliative care team is a consultative service. And so that means for us to be involved, there needs to be a referral to us from a physician involved in the care of the patient. And so for most people, speaking to their primary physician, or if they're mostly seeing a specialist as their main physician, speaking to that physician and asking about, do you think it's appropriate for my mom to be seen by palliative care? What I would say at this point is most of the doctors for the people who are dealing with this would say, great, yeah, let's set it up. We've had some challenges in terms of managing all of what we do with the team that we have from a keeping up with the volume standpoint. I would say that we have just had another physician and another nurse practitioner join our team, Dr. Alswade and his wife, and we're great. So I am hoping we'll be able to kindly respond. People do need to be seen in the office. If somebody is homebound and cannot come out, then a home visit, especially after the COVID era. Televisits, we're doing those now for somebody who can't get out but needs to be seen. So we look to try and come alongside the person and the family wherever they are.
That's fantastic. I think it's, sometimes I think people don't understand that they sometimes have to bring this up. In the time that you have to talk to your primary care doctor, they might be more focused on something else. And it's okay to advocate and to bring it up with the primary care physician and say, hey, we as a family, we want to have these conversations. We're ready. Because sometimes some families aren't ready, and a physician could make a referral and they don't do anything with it because they don't want to face it. And so I think, it's up to the families to let their physician know when the timing's right to really delve into some of these issues and take advantage of some of the services that are out there. And so, and I appreciate what you say about, a lack of, the team being very full, although I would say to you, I think we're very lucky in our area to have the accessibility to such a great team of people, because I don't think it exists in the same capacity in other areas. As we, our office extends quite a distance and we deal with people in different areas. And I would say that, what the palliative and hospice care team is able to provide far outshines what some other areas are. And that's not about the people. It also could be how valued that is by a hospital system.
Right.
And that's, so please know I'm not in any way putting anybody down. It's part of a huge system. And just like you're talking about allocating the resources, it's bigger than any one of us. So I would say to people here to don't be hesitant to try to reach out to that team and put on it. All righty. Well, I thank you for your time, Dr. Nesbitt. I know how precious your time is, and I really do appreciate it. Kyle, if you wouldn't mind putting up the document, because I want to kind of walk through that a little bit with people. Again, our system has always been anybody who attends our actual in-person seminar, we would do a free healthcare document for them. What here, we call the Pennsylvania Healthcare Power of Attorney. It truly is a healthcare power of attorney and a living will together. Within Pennsylvania statute, it is joined together as one document. This is going to be a different document that you might get into my office, where we're going to take more time to explain more things and do more things. And I do agree with Dr. Nesbitt that that's the best. At the end of the day, it's best. I talk to my clients about end-stage Alzheimer's and dementia. I talk to them about, would you want a feeding tube? And the reason I talk to them about that is if they say no, they wouldn't want a feeding tube after they've understood it, that's one less decision their child has to make in a crisis. There's not really a way to put that counseling and that thought process into a form online, but we did the best we could, because in this situation, having a form that at the very least says legally, this is the person I choose to talk to me, that I agree with Dr. Nesbitt is so valuable. And so if we can just do that one thing, that people don't fight about it, that people don't, it doesn't default to somebody I wouldn't want it to, One of the things I see in my job is that it would default to like a stepchild and a spouse equally. And often that's not what that person wanted. So this is a free healthcare power of attorney and living will. It follows Pennsylvania statutory form. You just fill out there your name as it would appear on the document. And so we really want that to follow what's on your driver's license if possible. Put in your city, and then you have to put in your agent. And you can have more than one agent, although there is always has been a slant within the medical community to say, name one person that you want to speak for you.
Amen.
And that name one person, so that if it's Dr. Nesbitt, he needs to know, who am I looking to talk to at this point in time? Now, in a world of autonomy, it's up to you. You can, and Kyle, if you switch to the next slide, you can name more than one agent, and you can have them act individually or jointly. It's really hard if you have them act individually, because what happens if Dr. Nesbitt calls them and one says yes and one says no? The answer is then no. And so at the very least, we want one agent, and we want to know who to call. But we also need to have alternate agents. So, and particularly, this is something that's really come up with COVID-19 already with our clients, where somebody appointed, we have a client, and she appointed her daughter to help make decisions for her. And unfortunately, when she was going to be moved into an assisted living facility, her daughter had to isolate and self-quarantine. And that assisted living facility wasn't technologically savvy, so somebody had to come sign the papers. So in that situation, we needed to go to an alternate agent. And that's why we want alternate agents. Somebody can be out of the country, they can be sick themselves. And so we definitely want to make sure that we have that alternate agent in there. So if I appoint, for instance, in my situation, if I appoint my husband, but for some reason he's unable or unwilling to act at that moment, then my daughter Courtney could take over and make those decisions in that time. That doesn't mean it can't go back to my husband, but in that moment, healthcare decisions, often we have moments of time that are really important, and we need the best person at that moment. And then this form really follows Pennsylvania's statute, and it asks you, do you wish to have healthcare treatment to relieve pain? And so there's a series of questions, and this is where Dr. Nesbitt's right. This is asking you, do you want treatments? And really the answer has to be, do you want, what's the outcome? How do you want that to act? And so I would tell you, in the event of an end stage condition, it tells what we specifically do not want. It is very harmful, in my opinion, not to say that you don't want those things at the end. So sometimes I have people who say, no, I want CPR. Remember, we're not saying, do I want CPR right now? We are saying, if there's no realistic hope of significant recovery, do I want CPR? And so under that, we really would not want to say no to those things typically, because this is at the very end. Now, I, through my career, have worked with people who have religious beliefs about food and water. And if you're one of those people, that you would want it at all costs. So the document is here asking you, the first question, do you wish to be given healthcare treatment to relieve pain or provide comfort, even if such treatment might shorten your life, suppress your appetite or breathing? So, that question's asking, if there's a counteraction, if I'm given a pain relieving drug and it may harm me in a different way, is that okay? Well, if the whole goal is to have the best quality of life right there, right then yeah. And again, we don't have to know those drugs. We don't have to know all of that. What we need to know is, if a doctor reads this, is he able to move forward with this? Do you direct that all life prolonging procedures be withdrawn or withheld? Again, understand that this is only in a situation where the doctor's already certified that there's no way that I'm going to get any better. And so as you go down here, you can answer these questions, but you want to be answering them with the mindset that this is triggered, that there's no way that I'm going to get any better. okay? It's not, a lot of times people think, well, I sign this and then I walk across the street and I get hit by a car, they're not gonna do CPR. That's not true. And they're gonna do everything to save your life. This becomes operative when there's no way that you're going to get any better. And so it's really important that it's couched in that. With these documents, when you fill it out, it will come back to us and to you. We will be looking at them at our office to see if there's anything that we think maybe the person didn't understand, or maybe there's anything that's, you know, not quite right about it, and we will reach out to you. At this point in time, the way we have it on here really just follows Pennsylvania statute, and we don't have a lot of explanation on here because that's beyond what we can do without giving, you know, information to you. But remember, when you're filling it out, this is not I get hit by a car and we don't know if I'm going to do any better. This is I'm a terminal end stage, and probably this treatment's not going to help me. It's just going to artificially prolong my life. In that situation, do I want my life artificially prolonged? And then I think the most important question is the bottom question. The bottom question says, my healthcare agent's use of instructions. My healthcare agent must follow these instructions, or you can click this, the instructions are only guidance. My healthcare agent shall have final say and may override any of my instructions. And that's where I really think you should say, these are only guidance. And it's because of what Dr. Nesbitt talked about. There is no way I, as an attorney, can put in writing in black and white every situation from being run over by a bus to having end-stage lung cancer to end-stage dementia. They're all so different, and this document is guidance. Again, we go back to the most important part of this document is appointing somebody who can act in your best interest. And whatever situation we're dealing with can at that point in time talk to the doctor and make the best decision. And in a perfect world, whoever you appointed, you having a conversation with them that's not about this document, but that's about real life, you telling that your agent who you've appointed how you feel. Dr. Nesbitt always talks about the kind of living that you want to live, helping to define that to your agent, then allow somebody like that to talk to somebody like Dr. Nesbitt and say, well, this is what the person told me. And so if you're telling me that if we do this CPR and you're going to break ribs and there's really not much of a chance of survival, that this person's going to be the way they are, then no, I don't think we want to do that. But it will always be that partnership together between having a good agent who knows what your wishes are right now, talking to the doctor with a medical expert at that moment to make the best decision for you. And this changes across the lifespan. So, you know, I still have kids at home. I would say to you, you know, part of the law words are a realistic hope of significant recovery. Right now, if something happened to me, I would want them to try to do everything to save my life because I want to raise my kids. It's really, really important to me. But if I was older, had lived my life, raised my kids, and dealt with a very harsh chronic condition, I might get to a point in time where I may feel differently about that. And that's why it's important to have ongoing conversations. It's also why I always bring up about diagnoses, because I think when you're given a diagnosis, that's an opportunity to talk about that set of circumstances and where that diagnosis is taking me, and understand if it takes me to X, I want Y. And so I think that's why it's so, so important. And then you'll hit send, and then you'll be sent the power of attorney. Now you still do have to sign it with witnesses, but they don't have to be my office or my staff. They just can't be the person that you appointed to that document. So our hope with this is that in an age of COVID-19, where if you're watching this and you want to get to me and I can't have you sign a document right now, because, you know, our office is closed, our physical location is closed, that this is the next best thing to that. I will also tell you that our office was given a waiver from the governor. We are able to meet with people who are at end of life or in a crisis situation. So our office right now, what we're doing is we're meeting with people virtually, either by Zoom like this or over the phone, gathering their information, drafting their documents. We are then going over those documents by the phone or through a virtual meeting like this where we can see the documents together or they're emailed. And if there is a crisis, that person has a diagnosis, that person needs to have this document done right now, we do have a waiver from the state to be able to sign those documents so that that person gets the help they need. If somebody is not in that situation where it wouldn't matter necessarily if it waited another month, we can go ahead and sign it virtually, or we can just wait and sign it when whatever new normal is going to happen ends up happening. So from my perspective, we are here ready to serve the community, and this putting Pennsylvania's statutory form online was a difficult decision for me because I truly believe that the best document is going to come out of people talking with us. But I also know that simply having a document that's legally valid and names the appropriate agent will be very beneficial to people. And honestly, if a doctor has that, that will be enough. And I truly didn't want people sitting out there worrying about this and not having a way to at least take a step forward. And so that's why we're making this available for free to our entire community, and hoping that it helps them feel a little bit more comfortable.
Kick in a comment also?
Sure.
Great. From the doctor's stand, I think it's super great that having this document available for people to be able to name their agent is there. This is really a really valuable resource for somebody who has not named their agent. There are a couple things as I look at the form from the doctor's standpoint, and I just think of this in terms of if I were in the hospital and then looking at this. First thing is all of these questions in this section are optional, right? And so if somebody said, I'm naming my loved one, but I don't really want to specify the rest of that. I want to name my loved one and then have that individual make decisions in whatever way. That's fine. It's not like you have to check off everything on this form. Is that right, Julie? Yeah.
That's correct. That's
So
absolutely correct.
good. And I will tell you from the doctor's standpoint, there's one question that I would advise being careful with, and that is that first one: do you wish to be given medicine to treat pain or provide comfort, even if such treatment could shorten your life? If someone were to check that and said, no, I don't want that, and then they're in the hospital and they're desperately short of breath or they're writhing in pain, it is absolutely true that every single thing in medicine we do has good and bad, and there's potential risks. I will tell you that as we're selecting dosing on these medicines, most of these, if you dose low, the risk of any of these bad things happening is very low. If you go high, it's high. So we're taking that into account all the time. But if someone were to preclude the use of those medicines on the front end, it would be difficult to help with symptoms. And honestly, occasionally I'll have a case like this and the family says, do something. And the person said, I don't want. And then we talk and we say, okay, well, we're going to use really low doses. We're going to be careful, but whatever. So just to be aware of that. And the last comment I would make is the checkoff box section, which is in the event of end stage medical condition. I specifically do not, the rest is blocked out by whatever's in the form, but I do not want these things. And the way the question is there, it would look like if you didn't check it, that you do want it. If you're saying, well, I specifically don't want these things and you didn't check, that could imply, oh, well, then he did want those things. And I would view that as maybe not actually true. That so just to be aware. And the other thing I will tell you that from the physician standpoint, sometimes we'll get into what I call the paper versus person problem. And that is somebody who has a form that goes check, 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 and they filled it out, 5 years ago in the lawyer's office, and the person, their agent, the one who is speaking for them, says, well, I think mom would want this given this circumstance, but somebody says, well, look at the form. She checked off the box that said she didn't. And then from a physician standpoint, we wrestle with what takes precedence here, the check off on the paper or the person before us. And in real life, I will tell you that if we have an agent, this person who knows their loved one, and hearing all the information that we give, they say, you know, I think in this circumstance, Dad probably would want a ventilator, at least initially, even though he checked off not, we will yield to the person because these situations are complex. They can change day by day. So those are just some thoughts from the doctor's standpoint about this. And again, I think having this kind of form where you have named your agent is so important. It's a great resource for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that. And I agree with you. The part that has all of the different mechanical ventilator, all the different options, CPR. I think the worst thing is when people check 2 out of 6. You know, for me, that's always when somebody comes into my office and they have an old document and they've checked just a couple of them. What I usually find out is they didn't understand what they were checking off. I would say to you, it's an all or nothing thing. So I agree with you, Dr. Nesbitt, that you can go ahead and not check any of them, or you could check all of them. Where it becomes more difficult, for at least for me, is what happens if they just check off 1 or 2. And, you know, then did they really understand the form? So I agree with you. If you don't feel comfortable with this, these are optional and you don't have to put this. And then that means that if not, your agent would just talk to the doctor. Even if you do, that's why I suggest that these instructions would be only guidance. And so that your healthcare agent can override them because either you didn't totally understand it or the circumstances have changed because they do change over time. So this document could be good for the next 15 years, but how you feel and what your health is over that period of time can certainly change during that period of time. So, alrighty. Well, Kyle, if you want to go to the last slide, I just want everybody to see, because we said that this is on our website. And so you'll see there our website, and that's where you can get this form. Again, just our attempts, and I'm sure we'll be updating it and changing it and tweaking it, but our attempts to help our community during this pandemic. Certainly it's something that is on people's minds, healthcare decisions and what would they decide. Also, if somebody were to get a diagnosis of COVID, you know, maybe that's a time to make sure that you have this document in place, and you might not be able to get it quick enough through the more normal channels. Of course, we as a law firm are always willing to answer questions and to help people more than just an online form, but want to make sure that it's accessible to everyone out there.